right? Well, thanks for the water. Good evening. Thank you for being here with us tonight. I thank those of you who are with me in person, those of you who are joining us live here on our Facebook page. Thanks for being a part of our Wednesday night Bible study. And I invite you to take your Bibles. Let's go to Genesis chapter 11. And we're going to pick up with verse 27. And while you're opening up to Genesis 11:27, I want to open us up with prayers we should do in all things in our lives. So let's pray. Gracious, loving Heavenly Father, once again, it is an honor and a blessing to be with you in your house, here in spirit as well, as we come now to study your word. And I just ask you to anoint us with your same powerful spirit that brought your word together. Bring us now together as one before your throne. And just continue to speak to us and give us a knowledge and a wisdom and an understanding that doesn't come from earthly books, but comes directly from your throne. So once again, we give ourselves to you. Bless this time, bless this study, and help us to stay focused now upon you. And we ask this in your holy, mighty, very precious name. Amen. All right, so as you know, last week we did finish up the first part of chapter 11. We talked about the Tower of Babel and talked about the fact that God does not do a bad thing when he disperses the people by breaking up, confusing their language, because of what they were about to do, it was a danger to them, the danger of physical harm from trying to build the thing to the physical harm that would come from the overcrowding that would occur when everybody in the world was at the one place. But the biggest harm was the spiritual harm, where they forget about God. They focus on themselves, and as a result, they would have abandoned God. So anyway, I now want to pick up with the story of Abram. But that actually begins in verse 27. So if you join me, I want to read, just follow along. I want to read to you from Genesis 11:27, and I'm not going to stop until I get to Genesis 12, verse 9. So just follow along and join me at this time. Now, these are the descendants of Terah. Terah was the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran was the father of Lot. Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his birth, in Ur of the Chaldeans. Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She was the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and Iscah. Now, Sarai was barren. She had no child. Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and they went out together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he parted from Haran. Abram took his wife Sarai and his brother's son Lot and all the possessions that they had gathered, and the persons whom they acquired in Haran, and they set forth to go to the land of Canaan. When they had come to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At this time the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he moved on to the hill country on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and invoked the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on by stages toward the Negev. Okay. Now, like I said, we have here now the beginning of the story of Abram. We know him later on. He's going to become good old father Abraham. But he doesn't start out with that. He's good old Abram right now. Now, Abram in Hebrew means exalted father. So it kind of gives us a heads up about what he will and like I said, when we look at his story there, though, in the last verses of chapter 11, the reason why I want to begin here is because there are three things that are pointed out to us that concern the story of Abram. First off, we discover in these verses exactly who Abram's father really is. You see, Terah is much more than just simply Abram's father. Now, if you were to look at the rest of chapter 11, beginning with verse 10, if you look over there, you discover in the genealogy of Abram's family that Terah is actually a direct descendant of who? Who is he a direct descendant of? Shem. And Shem is who? Shem is the oldest son of who? Noah. He is Noah's, actually his oldest son. So what we have here is, it's not just any family. This is Shem, Noah's oldest son, his family. And because of this, this family is a patriarchal family. It's an important family to the people and everything. And because of this, Terah is considered or looked upon as not just the leader of the entire family. He is the clan leader. Alright? He is the one in charge of the entire family, the immediate and extended family. His will is law for the people, okay? So Abram comes from a very important family. Now the second thing there in verse 30 of chapter 11. We are told what for the very first time in verse 30 of chapter 11? What are we told for the first time?
Sarai was barren.
Sarai is completely barren. She had no child. Now the question becomes this. Why do you think it was important to Moses for him to point this very specific thing out concerning Sarai or Sarai, however you want to say it, Sarai, right at the beginning of the story? Why does Moses point this out? Why do you think he points it out?
Is it because he's going to change the law, or?
Well, he's going to change the law, but he's also going to change the world using who? Not just a 75-year-old man, but also a woman who is what? Barren. Has no children. You see, this information is going to play a key part in showing both the mystery and power of God in the life of not just Sarai and Abram, but also the world. He is going to use, as we've been told, eventually, 75-year-old man and a barren woman. But there's also another reason why it could be considered important that we know about Sarai or Sarai, okay? And this is the third thing that comes up. Have you ever wondered why Terah's grandson Lot has always been such an important part of this story, or more importantly, why Abram cared so much about Lot? I mean, we know that he is his nephew. We know the biggest thing is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah that Lot is connected to, but that's the biggest story. That's the biggest thing. Why is Lot such a big part of this? Well, over the past few years, archaeologists, scholars have discovered a city that they believe was named Nuzu. Now, Nuzu was located northeast of Babylon. And what they found in the city of Nuzu are thousands of clay tablets that have recorded many of the social practices of the day of Abram, okay? Now, based on what's been discovered from these clay tablets, that according to the custom of the day, that following Haran's death, that most likely Abram actually adopts Lot as his own son. That he actually becomes more than just his nephew. That he is his adopted son. And Abram would have done this for two reasons. First off, for Lot's sake, to make sure that he retains his position there in that family. But most importantly, since Sarai or Sarah is barren, then Lot may be his only chance to have a what? A child, a son. But more importantly, have someone that will end up then caring for him. Someone that will care for him in his old age. So, now as we move from that, go into chapter 12 with me. Now, when it comes to the story of Abram, and I don't know about you, but for some reason, one of the scholars always talk about Abram's story is that Abram is now going to do something that a person or persons that they did not do back in this day and time, okay? And what was the one thing you did not do back in this time? When you were somebody, especially a part of a large family, you did not do what with your family? You didn't move away from them. You didn't leave them. You see, that was the custom. The tradition was you stayed with the family. You grew old in the family. You married within the family, okay, back in this time. Now, eventually, God's going to put laws together that's going to prevent, because one of the things we're going to discover with Sarai is that she is also Abram's half-sister. We'll discover that later on when we get into Genesis, okay? But the thing is, you did not leave the family. And from what we can read there in that first part of chapter 12, Abram, when he's told, he doesn't fight or object to doing this, right? He doesn't argue with God about leaving his family. So why was Abram okay with doing something that you didn't do back then? Okay with leaving his father, who was the clan leader of the entire family, leaving his entire family. Why would Abram be okay with doing something that you don't normally do? Well, the answer is actually given to us by Joshua himself. Now, Joshua, if you remember, we studied the book of Joshua. Did we do Joshua or did we do Judges? I think we did Joshua. When we get to the end of the book of Joshua, we get to chapter 24, what we have is Joshua's final speech before he dies that he gives to the Hebrew people. If you will, flip over to Joshua 24, verses 1 and 2 with me. Flip over to Joshua. You know, you got Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges. Just kind of keep going through the Pentateuch. You get to Joshua and go on to the end. You get to Judges. You passed it. But in Joshua 24, verses 1 and 2, then Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem, and summoned the elders, the heads, the judges, and the officers of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. And Joshua said to all the people, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, long ago your ancestors, Terah and his sons Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond Euphrates and did what? Serve other gods." Do you realize that the person who starts the Hebrew nation, the Israelite nation, comes from a family that actually worshiped other gods? They did not worship Yahweh. So what we believe is this, Abraham's first family worships other gods. So he's willing to break his ties with the family. Not for the sake of the family, but for the sake of Yahweh himself. Okay? So he's willing to do this, to do something that normally you wouldn't do. Alright? Now, from this day, especially as we get to verses 1, 2, and 3, there are two questions that come up that we ask ourselves, or, that's been asked about all this. The first question is this: why did God call Abram? Why did God choose Abram to do all this that he's now calling him to do, okay? Well, the truth is, there is no specific reason given to us why God picked Abram. All we can say is that the reason why God chose Abram can only be found in what we can call the mystery of God's wisdom and grace. God knew Abram just as he knows you and me. Or is there an answer? Look at verse 4. Is the answer to the question, why did God choose Abram, in that verse? Look at verse 4. What does verse 4 tell us? What do we see happening that can help us to answer why God chose Abram?
Well, he went with God.
He went. Notice it says, Abram went how? As the Lord instructed him. As the Lord told him. What's the one thing Abram did not do? He didn't want. According to verse 4, he did not want. did not argue. He did not what? Question God on what he told him to do. Instead, Abram does what? Abram stepped out on what?
Faith.
Faith. Was it his faith? Is that the reason why he chose Abram? The thing is, who else tens of thousands of years later is going to be chosen to do a hard job because of their faith? Because of her faith. Mary. Mary's chosen. You have found to be faithful to God. So maybe it's because of his faith then. He's willing to step on faith. Maybe because Abram's faith in God, the faithfulness that God chooses Abram then, okay? So the first question is why? Well, maybe because of his faith. But there's a second question. In these first 3 verses of chapter 12, what is the one thing that God does not tell Abram? In verses 1, 2, and 3 of chapter 12, what is the one thing that God does not tell Abram? Where he's going. You notice that he does not tell Abram where he wants him to go. Now, why does God think it's necessary to not tell Abram this? To strengthen his what? To strengthen his faith. He calls it maybe because he is faithful. But he does this to strengthen his faith. Now, why does God think it's necessary to strengthen his faith? See, God is about to ask Abraham to do something very scary, unusual, something nobody else does. And that is to not just leave his family, but he's about to step out into the what?
Unknown.
Unknown. He's stepping out into the unknown. But remember this, faith is not about stepping out into the unknown. Faith is about stepping out knowing what?
That God's got your hand.
God's got you. That God has got you. But the thing is, at this point, he's stepping out. God needed Abram to surrender any and all fears that he might have so that he could learn to trust in God more than he trusted in his fears. Okay? Now, I want you to remember all this, because I want to bring all this back to a certain point when we get to the end of this. Now, in verses 1, 2, and 3 of chapter 12, once again, let's look at these verses. And we now see an example of a what? What is actually going on here? We see the establishment of a what? We talked about this. It's already been established before. It's a part of these chapters we've already been through in Genesis. A covenant. Once again, we have a wonderful example of a covenant that's being formed between God and Abram. Now, once again, we know what a covenant is. It's an agreement between 2 or more people, 2 or more parties. I agree to do this, and in response, you agree to do this, or to do that. I do this, you do that, and together we will form a covenant, and we will do what needs to be done, okay? Now, as we see, though, in this covenant, the first person to agree to do something is who? Who's the first one that has to agree to do something? Abram. Now, Abram is the first one. It is Abram who must agree to break all ties, not just to the family, but to the homeland. Go where God tells him. Basically, Abram's job, his part of the covenant, is to place his trust, his faith, his life, where? Into God's hands. Rather than the ways and the traditions that he's grown up with. He's got to step out on faith and trust in God. That's all Abram has to do. Who does the rest of everything else? God does. The thing is, God doesn't do just one thing. God actually now is going to do 2 things to fill this covenant. First off, God will do what? Who's God going to bless? The first thing, God will bless Abram. God will bless Abram. He will make of Abram a what? A great nation. Now you've got to understand something. This word nation, it's more than just a group of people living on a specific piece of land or a specific territory. What God is promising Abraham, that he's going to give him his own base of power. Or, to put it another way, God's going to give him his own what? His own homeland. You see, God is asking Abram to leave not just his family, but to leave his home. And God is going to give Abram the thing that he's asking him to now leave behind. He's going to give this to him. And through doing this, making a great nation, he's going to make Abram's name great, and then God will make Abram a blessing to all people. But now that's only the first part of God's work in the covenant. What's the other part of the covenant that God is going to agree to keep? There's a second part to this. God is also going to bless who?
The people that bless you.
All right, if you bless Abraham, you're going to be what? Blessed. But if you curse Abel, then what will happen?
You're in trouble.
You're in trouble. That, you will be, but the thing is, it's not just Abel. What happens if you curse the nation that comes from Abel? You too will be cursed. If you bless the nation that comes from Abel, you will be blessed. And so, this is why we should be doing what today? Why every person in the world, why every nation, this nation and every nation in the world, we should be doing what?
Blessing Israel.
Blessing Israel. Supporting, siding with Israel today. This is the first step in this. Now, it's throughout the rest of the Bible why we should do this, but this is the first one. You see, should anyone treat Israel with blessings, then blessings they will receive. But if anyone treats Israel with curses, contempt, then they will reap the consequences of their curses. So this is why we need to be supporting Israel. We need to make sure that they know we are on their side. Because that's the only way we're truly going to be blessed as our own people, as our own nation. Okay? So we have the covenant. And God is doing most of the work. But the thing is, in the midst of all this, what three things do you think are going through Abram's mind at this point? He's hearing about all this. There are three possible things maybe that are going through his mind. The first one could be, how can all this happen since Sarai is what? Barren, without a child. How can a nation come from him since his wife cannot have children? Okay? Maybe he's thinking that. Secondly, if Abram adopted Lot as his son, then maybe he's thinking what? That all this is going to happen through Lot, okay? Could this be God's plan all along? But the third thing that's possibly going through his mind is this, that Abram knows what concerning all that God is now promising. He knows that he's not going to be what? Abram's not going to be what? He's not going to be around to see it. Which means what? He's really got to step out of faith. He's got, it's more than just having faith in your wife who is barren or your adopted son. This is going to be something, a nation is going to come from him, and Abram knows he'll never see this. But he's got to do what? He's still got to step out of faith and do this, knowing that what? God is going to bring this together. And Abram is just like the starting point of it all. And so then, look at the middle part, last part of verse 5. So as we see, Abram then, no matter what's going through his mind, Abram takes his family, his servants, and all his possessions, and he heads off toward the land of Canaan. Now what should stand out about the direction that Abram's now going? Well, apparently, God has now done what with Abram? Apparently, he's told him what? Where to go. Where he wants to go. But did you also remember, go back to verse 31 of chapter 11. Is this why Abram went where he went? Who was originally headed to Canaan, to the land of Canaan? His father was. Terah was headed that way. Now he stops and settles in Haran, and we never know why he does this. But that was his original plan as well. Did God first call Terah before Abram? But Terah failed. by Abel. So the thing is this why? But the bigger question is, why did God choose this place for Abel to go and kind of give this to him? If you look at verses 6, 7, 8, and 9, now there are a number of things I could say about this area. The tree that is mentioned, all the stuff that's going on, okay? The most important thing being, though, that God is sending Abram and his family into the land of the people that will one day become who? Israel's greatest one. Enemy. God is sending Abram into the land of the enemy, okay? He's sending them there. But the most important thing that I can tell you about this place is that it served as an international highway. This area was like the crossroads. Okay, a crossroads area, the Bible Belt type thing, all right? But most importantly, it kind of served as an international highway that connected what we know today to be the continents of Africa, Europe, and Asia, okay? And even though it's not mentioned, this area is very close also to what becomes known as the Mediterranean Sea. Now this should stand out to us because it also now tells us the original plan that God not only had for Abel, but for the nation that would one day come from him. What is one of the original reasons why the Hebrew people are God's chosen people? Why? It's because God chose them to do what one thing? What was the original job that the Hebrew people were given? What were they supposed to do?
Leave Egypt?
Well, no, not leave Egypt. This is before all that. The original reason why they're supposed to be God's chosen people is because they were given a job to do what? To take Yahweh into the world. They were supposed to be the chosen people to then tell the world. To tell the world about Yahweh. You see, now some people are not going to agree with this, and that's okay. I still believe we can disagree. We can agree to disagree. But see, I've always believed that the greatest failure of the Hebrew people was not the rejection of Jesus. See, I believe that their greatest failure was the rejection of doing the job they had originally been given. Because I believe this. If they had done what they were supposed to do, then Jesus wouldn't have had to come. If they had gone and done and shared the laws, that reveals God's love, that God is the one who created the world, created all of us. And why did God create this world? Why did God create you and me? Because he wanted somebody to do what? To give his love. They were supposed to take that message into the world. And they failed to do it. God has placed them at the crossroads of the world. At that point, this is where everybody crossed through. And they failed to do what they were supposed to do. But then look at verse 7 of chapter 12. Thing is, though, at this point, Abram is faithful. And he does all this. And as a result, God does what with Abram? There in verse 7 of chapter 12. He appears to Abel. Now, in the rest of the book, he's going to appear how? In a vision. But the way it's interpreted here in verse 7 is that at this one and only time, this is when God physically appears to Abel. He has a physical appearance that stands before Abel and tells him exactly what it is that he wants him to do. All right, so let's bring all this together then. The big question we need to ask is this now. So why should Abram's story be something that we should look at and study? Especially in response to those Christians who say that we don't need to or that we should not bother studying the Old Testament. There are churches, there are Christians, there are Christian leaders that will tell you that we shouldn't study the Old Testament. But see, I believe we should. I believe we should do this, okay? The thing is, do you remember what I told you about the first 3 chapters of Genesis? That everything that we're going to discover in the Bible in many different ways is going to be traced back to to these first 3 chapters. The story of creation, and the story of the fall, and the story of Cain and Abel. We've already, there's been a number of things that we've been looking in these first 12 chapters that have led us straight back to the creation story. You see, everything that happens in the first 3 verses of chapter 12 are also important. They're pivotal, not only to the story of Israel. These first 3 verses, 1, 2, and 3 of chapter 12, they're also pivotal to us. They provide connection to our story. Our story. Especially there. Look at the last part of verse 3. Because who is being talked about here? This is actually the beginning of whose story?
The family.
Well, not just the family. But more important, this is the beginning of Jesus' story. Look at that. Verse 3, I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. The Elite nation of Israel didn't do it. But who comes out of Israel that blesses all of Israel? Jesus does. This is the beginning of Jesus' story, which means it's the beginning of whose story also? Our story. This is the beginning of our story. That's why we need to do this. But we should take the time to read and learn about Abel, because it's also a very important lesson on what then? Faith. All the things that God calls for Abel to do, He is also calling you to do today. Us. Each and every one of us. Abel's story is also our story, because it can help to strengthen our faith as well. But I see there are times when God calls us to step out of faith and also do something scary. Trust Him. To be set up with your life and all of a sudden just say, hey, hear that voice say, Sam, I want you to work with you. And then, 11, 12 years later, that voice in the middle of the night, Sam, I'm ready for you to take the next step of faith. And I want you to become an ordained elder in the church. Folks, if that doesn't scare you, I promise you. I mean, when I first got called to be a youth pastor, I got so scared I got up and ran away from the church. I ran and drove home as quick as I could and went to my bedroom and closed and locked the door. I was so scared. And I still fought it for 5 more years. But just like Abel, God also asked us to surrender any and all our fears so that we can trust in Him more than we'll ever trust in our worries and our fears. This is why this story is so important to us. Because Abel is you and me. Now next week, we're going to stop here. Now next week, we're going to pick up with verse 10 and look at the rest of chapter 12. Look at Abel's story. But then we're going to skip over and pick up with chapter 14, verse 17. But I want to finish the opening part of Abel's story because, once again, this is our story. This is who we are. And so, I want to thank you at home for being a part of our study tonight. Like I said, join us next week as we finish up 12 and then skip over to 14, 17. And until we're together again, take care and God bless.